party because
Yes,
because it was
this
like
is a great night for you and Stephen and wedding pose. So,
I love being in New York and the fact that Steve is here and you know, this is awesome.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
You know, I'm watching that and I'm thinking, what year did we make? What year was that? What year?
Good question. No, yeah, our stuff we shot in November 2008.
2008.
It's 2012, y'all.
It's 2012, and it has yet to be released.
Yes, exactly.
So this has like been a long. I mean,
Yes.
usually a film is shot, and then it's usually a year to turn around a movie.
Yes.
2008.
Yeah, what the hell's going on?
God, what's happening here? So
yes.
this has been a long haul, and Christine has got the tenacity of I don't know what.
Yeah,
but this is the year of the dragon. This is the year to really kind of like.
Yeah.
This is the year that it's going to happen.
Yes.
This is the first time I saw this, so this was
Yeah.
really great to see everybody and to kind of get up.
Brings back memories.
Brings
doesn't
back
it?
memories. Because I didn't know what we were going to talk about here because I've forgotten already what we did. It's been so long.
Yeah, so we shot our stuff in November 2008.
Yeah.
And then, like the documentary says, that is all true. We totally ran out of money. So
yeah, I remember because we were doing the you know, in Korea when they make a movie, they do a traditional Korean blessing ceremony, and I guess it's taken from this kind of ancestor worship. I'm not exactly sure the meaning. There's a pig's head usually involved on the altar with fruit and other offerings. What is
that was a crazy night.
But what is the pig's head? I'm not sure what the pig's head significance.
The whole thing is just usually to give blessings for a new business or any kind of new venture for good luck.
But you don't know why the pig's head is
The pig's
involved.
head in particular. There's a lot of Koreans here.
Yeah,
does anybody have a clue?
I actually don't know.
Uni, anybody?
Anyway, that we did this, but it was during that blessing ceremony when you didn't actually know if we were going to actually start shooting the next day, right?
Yeah. I had basically, it took a year to get the financing actually together, and then that was November 2008. And then if you all recall, the global financial crisis happened in October 2008. So actually one of my main investors had to pull out. But we thought, you know, hey, we have enough actually to get the LA production at least done, or just something will happen, you know. I mean, you kind of have to proceed forward. And literally the night before we went into production, I was called to the line producer's office, and they're like, we're canceling the production.
And then what happened?
And then I was just stunned. I was just like dumbfounded because I mean, how do you actually take news like that? And then actually Derek, who's the executive producer and editor for the film, he came in and he's like, look, you know, you better start getting on the phone and start raising money right now because I don't want to see you, like, you know, committing suicide in like a month. Okay? And actually, that in some ways, that was a very real statement because I had been working as a writer for about 10 years prior, and all of my management didn't actually want me to make the film. You know, they didn't get the movie, they didn't believe in it. But I had just reached a point where I was just like, I had to do something to become a director. And so I had refused all this writing work for the year prior so that I could create the opportunity to make the film. And then I had gotten all this corporate sponsorship lined up for that period of time, that month. So I knew that if I didn't shoot it, the moment would never come again.
That night when you got the call that the money had dropped out,
I just started calling everybody that I know.
And
I called a lot of family members. My family came through. I have a huge family, actually. I called up, classmates. I called up just everybody that I knew. And within about a couple hours, I had a verbal commitment for a bulk of the money. Not the whole money, but so then I just pretty much, I walked into the line producer's office and I was like, yo, we got the money, we're on. Call the Teamsters, we are on, this movie's happening.
So if somebody asks, what is the budget? What was the budget for this movie? Can you share that?
It's very low, yeah.
You can give us a number?
Very, very low. If we would have shot and paid for everything that we paid for, it would have been about 3 times as much as.
I mean, one of the things that happened was actually at the premiere at the film festival in Los Angeles. I remember is there was a big, wonderful after party, and then we all went out to this restaurant and had a great time. But then it ended with the waiter like not having been paid, and the waiter is chasing us in the parking lot. This is a true story. And the waiter was not paid.
Yeah.
He was never paid, right?
He was. I don't want to get that.
That's how bare bones this whole thing was.
Yeah, the funny thing about the whole, even the party itself, and just kind of about the whole method of making the film, was just like, as an independent filmmaker, as an independent producer, you just kind of have to like do it, and then know that actually the money is coming. So that's kind of like my advice for independent filmmakers or independent artists. Is
that's how the whole economy collapsed. By the way, the money is on its way.
Yes.
You should work for Wall Street. This one.
Sometimes I feel like I do. So for you.
How many people here? Did anybody? I know Jay saw the movie, but did anybody else here see the movie? Oh, so a few people saw the movie. Cool.
Yeah. So for you, I guess the great thing about Steve is that when I was even when I was just thinking about becoming a filmmaker, to actually see Steve on In Living Color and to see this like Asian guy on mainstream network television, it was this it's just really this kind of like affirmation that that it can happen, because there were no Asians on television, and then the fact that he was Korean on top of it was like an added bonus, And when we were casting the film, a lot of the people that, like Bobby Lee, or even Margaret or Jean or any of the actors, all the actors, I mean, everybody pretty much was like, they got on board because Steve was there. Seriously, that was actually like a big draw for a lot of the other actors. So it's like, for you actually participating in the film, were you kind of like aware of?
This is the first time actually hearing of this. Seriously, but thank you.
Yeah. So for you, I mean, what was the experience like, just in terms of like working with other?
Oh, it was great. I remember actually it was like we had the makeup trailer, and we were getting our makeup done outside in Koreatown. I don't know what street it was. But then Kelvin was sitting next to me, and I said, Kelvin, I'm just cherishing this moment, because it really is so rare to be doing a film that's really celebrating Asian Americans and being around other such talented Asian American actors and the crew and everything, everybody involved. It was really like a family. So I remember just sitting with Kelvin and just relishing the moment, realizing how fleeting it is, and it was. It was very. It was such a great time. I had a really great time.
It seems like you've lost weight since then.
Really?
Can you?
Well, I was, they graded my hair quite a bit, and I decided I wanted to be have a little pudge thing on me.
Yeah.
So the only thing that the wardrobe people had was a stuffed turtle. It was some like kids.
That was a little stuffed animal.
Yeah, plush toy animal. Yeah. That was my belly. It was a turtle. So they stuck it in there, and then they wrapped it around with an ace bandage, and then we did that. It didn't. I don't. Looking at it.
The turtle was like a part of you.
Yeah, it was part of me. Yeah. So
actually, so I remember on the first day too, you were like, "Oh, I think I need some glasses or something." So then
I remember, we were, and also,
was like part
speaking
of
his community spirit, also Brian had a lot of connections in Koreatown. So I remember he would go into different businesses and basically ask for favors, and they would give him favors. So I got my glasses as a favor from
one of the vendors.
eyewear store in Koreatown.
Yeah.
So, Brian
you
was like,
hadn't thought of
he was
that.
like, oh, it's like, oh, we're making a movie, and he was like, yeah, oh yes, and then they would do whatever he asked, and it was great. That was really great. So I don't know. I think we should take questions. Yes.
Yeah.
I am interested.
Oh, you have a microphone right there.
Yeah.
I'm interested in you elaborating a little bit more on differences between making a movie in the U.S. and Korea, the cultural differences and how you took to it.
The main difference between shooting in the U.S. and shooting in Korea is actually unions. I mean, Hollywood or the film business, as you probably know, is a very highly industrialized business sector here in the United States, whereas in Korea, there are no unions. So that fundamental difference informs how production crews are organized, it informs how production schedules are organized, and it informs actually job descriptions.
So it's much more flexibility.
Yeah, but then you also have things like 24-hour days that are on
high
the schedule.
burnout rate,
The thing I love about the Korean film industry is that really people are making films there because of their sheer love of cinema. There's still this this sensibility of cinema and the artistic process, and a sense of somehow greater good.
It shows in their movie making.
It really does. Their passion. I was just really I was astounded. And especially, I think, for independent filmmakers or filmmakers doing films on a budget, I think Korea has a lot to offer because the challenge with making a film here in the United States on the budget, but still wanting quality, is definitely working with the union. So, the moment as a director you step on set, you're being asked to compromise, because you have a 12-hour day. If you go over, like, I couldn't afford overtime. So, the moment you step on set, you're being asked to drop shots. So the whole thing becomes very improvisational, which, on the other hand, is a great asset of American filmmakers, is that they're highly improvisational. They know how to, they're very nimble, the crews. But, I guess, but in working in Korea, the great advantage is that it's a very planned process. And the whole filmmaking system is very different. So, so actually, you can, as a director, I mean, it was amazing because I could actually walk onto a set and know I'm going to get every single shot that I want, which is a huge difference. So a lot of the things from a production level that we couldn't achieve in the United States just because of money and cost and inflexibility, I was then kind of able to make up for in Korea because just because the system itself allowed for it.
The interesting thing, I just want to add on to that. When I was being introduced, they mentioned I'm going to be working with this director, who I just started working. I just got back from Prague, shooting The Snowpiercer with Bong Joon-ho, who directed Mother and The Host.
The Host, yeah.
And so a couple of differences. I mean, one of the things I realized just talking to him and the other producers is that there are also children in this movie, Snowpiercer. So when you're working with children in Korea, you can work them as long as you want.
Exactly.
But
and animals too.
Yeah. But if you're working according to the rules of the Screen Actors Guild, then you can only work children a certain amount of time, and then they have to be released. And so there are all these rules, basically to protect actors, because traditionally, I mean, I just actually worked in Romania as well, and the actors there, they bring in an American actor, and the conditions are that they have to abide by Screen Actors Guild rules. So there has to be like a 12-hour turnaround. So if I finish work at 8 o'clock, they can't ask me to come back until 8 o'clock the next morning.
Right.
But once I leave, then everybody else on the film basically goes back to their old rules. So then no sleep. Let's get the film done.
Right.
And
yeah.
then basically, I mean, so it's really difficult because that wasn't actually the case for me in this Romanian film because we were shooting non-SAG. So I was like operating on like 4 hours of sleep. and then
I got to
have
give
your
it to Brian T. too, because we were totally in Korea. We were operating like a Korean crew. So the only people that were overlap between the U.S. and Korea was myself, Kang Hae-jung's dialogue coach, and Brian, actually. So there was one day we had in the first period of production in Korea. It by accident it turned it into a 24-hour day. It wasn't scheduled that way, but the CG team had showed up like 5 hours late. So, and then by that time, everybody was totally delirious. So we were like not even. Like,
but according to,
functioning.
But definitely the Korean system is moving towards the Hollywood system, according to what they're telling me.
It is, but I still think probably for the bigger budget like CJ Entertainment or bigger Showbox, the main studios, but still the the mainstay of the Korean film industry are a lot of independent productions or domestic productions. So, the whole thing is that even the way that the crew is organized, so say, for example, in the United States, the assistant directing department, their main job function in the United States is to keep union rules. Their main job is paperwork, is to clock people in and to clock people out. In Korea, because it's not unionized, there is no paperwork. Everybody here in the United States has like a contract that's like 10, 15 pages long or something. In Korea, it's like a half a page or 1 page. So,
so in Korea, you're just like if your main actor starts to develop bags under her eyes or whatever, then you're like, okay, we need to give our actor a little more sleep. So it just becomes about practicality, like we.
Well, I mean, of course, not every day is a 24-hour day, but crews start getting going at kind of 8 hours. It's just a different rhythm, and they're very like say between takes. In America, the idea between takes is to like not have any downtime, is to like just keep on going, not have any kind of like lag time in between. In Korea, you call cut and there's just like, suddenly it's just like detail duty, so the art department's all over it, everybody's like readjusting and it takes sometimes like 15 minutes between takes. So it's actually, it's like a totally different rhythm. And the AD department, the assistant directing department, their main function is to literally to assist the director. So because they have no paperwork, because there's no unions to report to. So their whole job is more creatively focused. So of course, as a director, it's great.
Yeah.
I liked it, but it's just really different. But both the U.S. system and the Korean system, I think, has its upside and downside. Certainly,
Any questions?
Sorry about that. Can you talk about the response so far in the U.S. versus the response so far in Korea, and what the differences are in terms of the response?
So far, actually, we have not had a formal, full-on audience screening in Korea yet. I've really just been focused on the U.S. market first. But I will say this, that when I've screened it, say, for a first-generation Korean audience, that's more Korean language speaking, they are a little bit confused by the film because the film is not, it's being marketed, of course, in the U.S. market as like a Korean or Korean American film, but it's really not a Korean movie at all. I mean, I was born in the U.S. I was raised in Iowa and in Memphis, Tennessee. So I'm like, I consider myself totally American. I had to really make it a point to associate to discover my Korean cultural heritage, which is really different than being Korean and living there, growing up there. So the innate sensibility is totally different. So for them, this is very much, but at the same time, the Korean film industry or Korean audience, their idea of America still is they don't have a diverse picture of America. I mean, America is actually a very diverse country. But their idea of America, primarily really because of what they see in Hollywood, is that America is a Caucasian country. So they don't know what to kind of do with this film in terms of, is it a Korean film? They know it's definitely not a Korean film, although it has Kang Hae-jung in it. And part of it was shot there. but it's not, but is it an American film? Well, this is different because it's all Korean people in it. So
it's its own genre.
It's its own genre.
People are going to be
Right.
calling, that's a wedding palace.
Right.
That's going to be the term for this kind
Right.
of genre.
Yeah, why not? So, but a general in the United States, I've been very, overwhelmed that the response in general has been very positive, very positive. I mean, as a filmmaker, as an artist, you kind of work in a vacuum for, you have a hunch about what might work, but then to actually see it played out and see the audience reaction is different, actually. So, so we actually put it out on the road a lot last year. I finished the film finally last year, February. And then over the last year, we did a lot of festivals. We did a lot of academic tour. And as we're planning the U.S. distribution. And I've been really encouraged because people, not only Koreans or Korean Americans, but it seems to be playing to non-Koreans as well, which is obviously the ultimate goal. Is I'm from Iowa. I would love the movie to play in Iowa.
Yes.
One thing that the documentary didn't go into was the animation.
Oh,
That was
yes.
played a very critical part of the movie,
Yes.
which I saw and loved. And
You're
thought
so
was
right,
amazing.
Rob.
And I just wanted to ask whether that was always a critical part of it, the way that you envisioned the movie. Was that there at the start? To what extent did it change? And how complicated was that, hiring this apparently brilliant animator? Was the animator Korean as well, or Korean American?
Yeah,
That's
so there's about 2 sections in the film that are animated, and it has to do with the part of the narrative that deals with the family curse. And originally, it was not conceived as animation. I wanted to do it live action, but then in looking from a production perspective and cost, of course, that means cost perspective, it involved, a remote. Going out of Seoul on remote, costumes, period piece. That's like about at least 4 days of shooting, actually. So it basically became cost prohibitive. But then, having done an animated show, Afro Samurai, I thought, well, maybe doing this part animated would be kind of cool. And it would work creatively because ultimately I look at the movie as kind of a fairy tale. And so that just it went with the kind of whimsical idea or creative idea. And so then I started looking at it into animation. But then the challenge became, so I was going around Korea looking for the right animation studio. And the truth of it is that most of the Korean animation studios, they're looking at, series to do, the next Simpsons or something like that. So then for them to ask me, for me to ask them to do it, 5 minutes of animation, you're not going to get paid very much, but it's going to be really cool. It's not that attractive right, to a lot of people. But I happened to find a small company. They're called B-Box. And they did a lot of visual effects, but they were just I loved their artwork. They had great artwork. And the way I would describe it, I was like, look, I want to do this animation sequence, and it's going to be kind of like Asian calligraphy, screen artwork like that screen back there, but it's South Park, And they're like, oh, what? But this company, they got it. They completely got the concept, and then they actually took it to a whole nother level.
Do they animate South Park in Korea? Do you know?
No, they don't.
No.
But they do Simpsons, but they don't really do usually for those series, they do the artistic direction in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And then they do the production,
Right.
just kind of like the factory type of work or whatever in Korea.
Right.
So.
Somebody back there?
Yes. So my question is, from the conception of writing the idea of the story to actually raising funds for the story, how long did that take? And what was your process of getting the first funding to catch on to hopefully steamroll the following funds for the remainder or a portion to shoot the movie? And I forgot my last part of the question. But how long did it take you from writing to fundraising?
Well, I originally came up with the idea, and I had a co-writer for the script. I have to credit him. His name is Robert Gardner, and he was actually my writing professor also at USC, because I came into film more from a fine art and music background, so I really was not really a writer when I originally started. So we wrote the script together, and that was in 1999. And then shortly after that, I had an opportunity. There was partial funding available in Korea, and we were looking at doing the film in 2000, but the rest of the funding never happened, so the whole project shut down. I came back to the U.S. totally depressed and well, whatever. And then, but the script had its own life, so it got me basically every writing job I ever had. So I knew that there was something about the material, and then in like 2001 or 2002, it had been submitted to another finance company that then they called me and they were like, oh, you know what, we're deciding between your movie and a movie that's similar to yours, but it's Greek. I was like, Greek? That is so
really?
obscure. It's like Koreans were so much more popular than Greek people. And then that turned out to be My Big Fat Greek Wedding. But of course, that was produced by Tom Hanks's production company, and from a business perspective, I'm like an independent filmmaker compared to Tom Hanks. There's really not that much of a contest. So the script sat on my shelf again for years until really, in 2006, then it sat on my shelf, and then in 2006, I got a call from an executive from Warner Brothers in Beijing, and he was like, I want to do this movie, but as a Chinese language remake. So I was like, okay, fine, I don't care, just do something with it, somebody. So he had, it was going to be with another director, and we had done a deal, and he was going to, we redeveloped it and switched the male and the female characters around. But then they basically wanted to develop out the main point of the story that kind of makes it unique, which was like the short element or whatever. And I was like, I think you actually kind of want a different movie, really, because that's kind of the only thing that makes it unique.
Yeah.
And then that started the whole train again. And then the producer that I knew, he was like, why don't we do this movie as you originally envisioned it, as Korean, with you directing, and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, okay. And then, but I was working on another writing assignment at the time, and I'm not really very serious about it. And then it was actually the worst writing assignment I ever had. And I was like breaking out into a rash from it, and I was like, this is not what I came to Hollywood to do. So then I just decided at that point just to kind of jump off the cliff and make it happen. And then, but I knew that traditional sources of financing were not going to be available for the movie. So that's why I went to the nonprofit organization, and then from there we sought out corporate sponsors, because still I knew that the financing would, the objective was to come from the Korean American business community, which is very successful in Los Angeles. So I thought, well, there might be an opportunity there, but Koreans, we like brand names. So I figured if I have some established brands on board just to kind of give it validation, then it could attract larger financing.
Do you think if you were starting today, you would use Indiegogo or Kickstarter or one of those?
Yeah, probably. Definitely.
Has there been any feature films that actually have been financed through Kickstarter that you know of?
I think that there are quite a few, although I think my objective with the movie was really to try to create as much of a commercial movie as possible with the highest production value possible, to make it as studio-like as possible. So, the approach to quote-unquote independent filmmaking with this project maybe is a little bit different than a lot of the projects that you see on those portals.
Hi, Christine. Sorry, I was given the mic. As a member of New York Women in Film and Television, I'm of course very interested as as a woman director, and as apparently you just said that was not your first intention to be the director. You were writing and then directing. In the years since you started, do you think that it's become easier for a women, because we know that women directors are very underrepresented. We are not less talented, but we are very underrepresented. So going with all the experience that you've had, and I commend you for that, and I'm grateful that you have continued your journey. Do you think that there is any easier journey for you ahead, let's say now as a director, as a woman?
My intent always was to become a feature film director. Writing was like a necessity. It was like a path to direct. When I finished film school, I worked as an editor first, and then, but I knew that really wasn't a path to directing, that I knew I kind of had to write my way there. So, because really, I mean, like you just stated, at the Directors Guild of America, only 6% of members are actually female, and most of them are television directors. So really there's only a handful of females doing feature films at the studio level, or, I mean, there's definitely more independent filmmakers that are females for sure these days. But I still think that the concept of a female being the creative source or the creative center of a production is unfortunately still not very common. But for myself, I hope that, I really hope that this was the most difficult experience I've ever been through in my life. And now as I move into the present and the future, things are definitely have gotten easier. So hopefully the worst is behind me.
Anybody else?
Yeah, from what I read online with the introduction and the clips that I saw, I believe also YouTube. What I saw online about this event this evening, and then from the clips that I saw online and here tonight, I'm certainly really intrigued about it. And as someone who reviews and writes about Asian films, I want to know when I'm going to be able to see it so I can write about it.
Good question. Good question. Yeah, so here's the deal with hopefully seeing the movie. Right before actually I was finished with the film, I had an opportunity to screen it for a guy named David Gale, who used to head up MTV Films, and now he's on the digital side. And he's like, look, Chris, I really hate to tell you this, but I really think you're going to have to distribute the film yourself. And I was like, don't tell me that. I've already been through hell. What are you talking about? And he's like, look, because the studio model has pretty much changed, and and also the Asian American demographic has changed since the time of a movie that he had picked up called Better Luck Tomorrow, which many people cite as the breakout Asian American indie film that was done by a director named Justin Lin, who has gone on to do a lot of the Fast and Furious franchise films. And so he said, look, you've got the internet and as a marketing tool that we didn't have back then, and also you have a really good soundtrack, and you've got a really good cast. At the time, I was not finished with the film yet. I was still hadn't even done the sound mix, so literally that was the last thing I wanted to hear. But when I finished the film, I had an opportunity to screen it for a couple studios and also a few of the major agencies. And you're in those screenings and they're laughing and they're not Asian. And then at the end of the screening, they're like, that was so funny, but but this movie is Asian, but it's English language, and it's actually a mainstream comedy. So how do you market a movie like this? So I was like, well, why don't you market it like it's a movie? How's that? That's a novel concept. And they're like, they just couldn't get their heads around those kind of three things. So when push came to shove, I'd ask them, well, actually, if you're going to distribute the film, what would you actually do? So they said, well, we would put it, you know, in a theater in LA and New York. Pretty much they would go straight to DVD, and then they would basically put up some posters in a bathroom, like in K-Town or Chinatown or whatever.
Over the urinal.
Yeah, and with all the I've been through, explicatives that I've been through, and also the dedication of a lot of people who made this film possible and happen, and also in the interest of my financiers, I just didn't think it was good enough, you know. So I had a quiet moment with myself, and then I really just started to think, well, I went back to the conversation I had with David Gale, and I thought, well, you know, if I'm going to look at distributing the film, of course I went online, and then I saw, well, My Big Fat Greek Wedding. They actually did it the same way. They were rejected by every major studio, and they actually put the movie, that organization, they put the movie in the theater themselves. And so I started researching it more and more, and I thought, you know what, if it's all very possible. It actually just comes down to a matter of financing. And I've been there before, so why not? And then I started basically, like, my office turned into like the US Census Bureau for the next month. And I know where like every Asian person in America lives now. And like, so I created this like huge Excel chart of all the whole entire Asian population. You know, what language they speak, who's bilingual, who's English-only speaker, who's in-language speaker. And I basically started mapping out where, and the whole trick with theatrical distribution is that you put a theater every 7,000 population. So I started literally mapping out what the theatrical pattern of the movie would be. And in the beginning, you know, a very common pattern for independent films is to go the festival route, of course. So I had submitted it to Sundance, Tribeca, all the mainstream film festivals, and I wasn't even getting a rejection letter back. So I was like, you know, the movie's not even being looked at. But when I was submitting it to Asian film festivals, they were very excited about it, and I was getting the best screening times, like, you know, Friday night at 7 o'clock or Saturday night at 7 o'clock. So they were, you know, putting all their resources behind it. So I just got to think, I was like, you know what, to get the movie out there, I need to go the path of least resistance. I need to bring the movie to the people that are going to support it. And then it just started me on a path to research more about market demographics and the Asian American consumer demographic, and I was really astonished at my findings. And what I discovered is the Asian American demographic as a consumer base, we actually spend 35% more on entertainment fees and admissions than the total population. We're actually opening weekend moviegoers 6% more than the total population. And I started then thinking about some of these figures, and I thought, well, you know what? You know, who's in line for the new iPhone first? You know, we like the new stuff, you know. We're very early adapters of a lot of new products. And then I started thinking about also my findings in the US Census and looking at the economy of the Asian American demographic. And what I'm trying to do beyond, of course, making the film a success is starting to change some of the rhetoric about how we talk about the Asian population in America, because according to the US Census, yes, we're about 18 million people. So people can say, yeah, okay, you know, we're only 5% of the population, 6% of the population. Maybe we don't deserve certain resources because we're just not that much. But when I started looking at the economy of the Asian American demographic, we are a $750 billion economy, consumer economy, which is actually just $200 billion behind the African American consumer economy, but yet they're actually almost 4 times our size. When I started looking at small businesses and the amount of jobs that we have actually created in small businesses, we're actually 2 million small businesses, and combined between the African American and Hispanic communities, we've actually created more jobs. So when you start looking at like the other color, which is green, it tells a very different story. So what I'm hoping that this movie does is open up a conversation also about the Asian American demographic, and hopefully with the idea of creating actually an entertainment economy, because what I see and what the movie taught me was there's a lot of talent out there. There's just a lot of talent that just doesn't get represented in a way that, is actually just basically fair.
But when and where is it going to be released? Wasn't that the question?
Yeah. So hopefully, yeah. So hopefully it will be this fall. Hopefully it will be this fall, but it is also dependent on, I'm also in the middle of finalizing some financing so that I can also properly theatrically release the film. And then...
So the fall in New York City, where will it be at Angelica, for instance?
Well, I've made deals directly with AMC, Regal, and Landmark. So I'm trying to put the film into mainstream exhibition chains.
Which means
so
that
the film will actually open in the top 10, and initially to begin, we've got 275 screens in the top 10 demographic markets. So it'll open Southern California, New York, New Jersey, and Honolulu. Oh, cool. And then the next following weekend, the top 10 cities are like Chicago, San Francisco.
So all like
area.
AMC theaters will be screening it?
Well, not all, but yeah. In the areas that we've actually cited where the majority of the target population goes to first. But the goal, obviously, is to, as an independent, essentially studio, independent distributor, the goal is to get that opening weekend. That's actually very critical. That's why I need your support to show up for the opening weekend. Because as an independent distributor, you actually live or die in the first opening weekend.
That will determine the longevity of it.
That will determine the longevity of the film. Yeah. So if we don't perform, because what happens, I mean, people kind of think distribution is this kind of magical thing, but really it boils down, of course, to the numbers. So if your movie performs well, then what starts happening is exhibitors across the country, they say, you know what, your movie, it just made $7,000 per screen average. They don't care if the people involved are purple.
And
they
to me, that seems so much a byproduct of marketing.
Yes.
So you have to have a huge budget for marketing in order for them to make that happen. I mean, the movie could be great, have terrible marketing, and not have any numbers at all.
Exactly. So I've been very fortunate to the business model for actually producing the film was to create relationships with corporate sponsors, with mainstream corporate sponsors, and that business model continues in the marketing of and distribution of the film. So we are teaming up with various corporations so that the studio, that my company, basically we subcontract the minimum for publicity and various people, theatrical bookers, and then we actually team up with corporate sponsors to help create commercial tie-ins and media buys and so on and so forth. So that hopefully, it can be a financial success, which will then net future opportunities, not only for myself, but for other people involved in the demographic.
So we're going to have the last two questions about
Hi, my name is Ho-sik Kim from the Korean American Film Festival New York. We screened the trailer last year, and it's really good to see the documentary today. So less than 2 weeks ago was the LA riot, and I guess a year ago you had your screening, and now looking back as a Korean American artist, has Korean American artist or has Korean American story made any progress from the 20 years ago, or do you see any difference comparing 20 years ago and now as a Korean American artist, as a Korean American perspective?
I think so, definitely, and that stems from really two things, or really three things. One is, of course, there's a numerical increase in the population itself in the U.S. of Koreans. And two, I think with every generation, parents are more open to different ideas for their children about professions. And I have to give my parents a lot of credit for always, being very encouraging to support me and to encourage me in artistic endeavors. And the third is actually the synergy I would say Korean Americans and in Korea itself. Me as a Korean American artist, I'm very influenced also by this concept of hallyu or Korean wave. And it's very exciting of what's going on, and that is a government initiative. I was just in Daejeon speaking at a hallyu conference that was supported by the Ministry of Culture, and there's a big initiative going on in the government about changing Korea from hardware, like Samsung phones and blah, 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 but also putting an initiative into what they perceive as software, which is the cultural byproducts like K-pop, Korean movies, Korean dramas.
That must
and I think
be
that's very
that must
powerful
be
thing.
actually, because this film that I'm doing is probably the biggest Korean film in the history of Korean filmmaking. It's being shot in Prague. It stars Tilda Swinton and John Hurt and Chris Evans and Octavia Spencer and just an enormous cast and people from all over the world. I mean, it seems like no expense has been spared to make this movie. So I feel like that probably is part of this initiative that you're speaking of.
Yeah, I mean, well, for one thing, Bong Joon-ho is an incredible director. He's a world-class director, so why doesn't he deserve the opportunity to make films on a world-class level? But I think the interesting thing about Korea is they have gone entertainment crazy. Okay, they really have, and it's
as far as Asia in particular, right? They're kind of ahead of China and Japan.
Korean performers, probably as many of you know, are the top entertainers for the whole Asia market.
But more into Korean Americans,
Uh-huh.
clear efforts coming from the Korean American community to better or increase the output?
Well, I would say
Well,
that...
look at TV, for instance. You have Daniel Day Kim and Grace Park and Margaret Cho is kind of a cultural icon. And
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that there are, within the studios, of course, there are diversity initiatives, but I also feel that, a lot of perception, especially in the independent filmmaking world, for Asian American directors or Korean American directors is, oh, it's so hard to get community support, and they won't, give up anything or whatever. But I have to say, having made the film, the movie is a materialization, is a realization of the Korean American community support. The movie would not have been made without their enthusiasm, without their participation. So I can't actually legitimately say that anymore. I think that it's just a matter of having the right product that is going to, because the film wasn't a gangster movie or something, hopefully it puts Korean culture in a positive light. So I think it's just about having the right product, and I've been really amazed and I feel very blessed to have had the opportunity to make this film, and even just here today having this opportunity to share it with you, with the Korea Society. And this is a result of having a conversation actually with Susan last year. She was involved with a project called Kimchi Chronicles as the marketing director. And just that project, the fact that it was made, and then I just had a conversation with her and we developed a relationship, and suddenly, I'm here and Steve is here and we're having an opportunity. And, we're at the beginning of something very interesting that's going on, what I hope. So, and I think that now with the FTA, with Korea, this is only the beginning. There's a lot of opportunities, I think, for Korean Americans, especially us being bicultural. We're a lot more ready, I guess, to take on the challenge of what it's going to take to bridge these cultures.
And Korean food is becoming more mainstream,
yeah.
Right? Like bibimbap is everywhere now, right? Like you get it at the local deli, and you have the kogi truck now, and the kimchi tacos, and
food,
it's becoming more
music.
mainstream.
I mean, it's a very interesting time, I think, that we're living in, and I think that there's a lot of opportunities for Korean Americans in all sectors. Whether that be entertainment, whether that be law, whether that be health. It's a very interesting time, and I think people in Asia, they need people like us also, who are bicultural, who are going to take on the challenge of and interest in being there. I mean, my lawyer, for instance, who's back there, his name is Jay Cho. I originally met him in Korea, and he was working for an international law firm, and he's Korean American. And me being, essentially having this is an international film, and being Korean American and culturally being able to work and finding somebody like Jay who gets both cultures, who understands, because from a legal perspective, the documents that I had to deal with in Korea, just through American eyes, a lot of people would freak out because there's not a lot there, but working with Jay and also understanding both sides, he understands like what the standards are on both sides, and what it's also going to take to, sometimes you can't be so rigid. You kind of got to go with the flow as well, and having working with people who understand both sides of the coin is really invaluable to create new opportunities. So.
It's a time to wrap up, and then personally, and also just working at the Korea Society, it's a great pleasure to not only having it this time, and also preparations the whole time to just have this moment to promote the wedding policy. This is based on Korean incursions and everything. So when you're just gonna set up the dates to release the New York, I will gonna be the one to let you know that's when it's gonna date and the time and the place. So thank you so much for coming, and I wish you have it back next time.
Thank you.
Here and there when you're gonna next movie. Thank you so much for coming. And friend, all right. So she gonna. All right.
Fran and Uni and Susan, thank you so much.
For both of you, what's your next project? What are you working on next?
I have also transitioned to doing commercials. So I'm actually working on a new commercial campaign for a yogurt franchise. And I'm also working with NBC on directing a talent showcase for them. And then this year, and then meanwhile next year, I'm planning my next U.S.-Asia co-production feature film. So.
Cool. I'm actually going back to Prague to continue working on this movie, The Snowpiercer, which is probably shooting until July, but I'm going back in June. And just to give you a basic synopsis of the movie, it's about 20 years in the future. Because of global warming, all the nations have come together in order to stop global warming. So they've collectively dropped this chemical into the atmosphere in order to bring the temperatures down. And as a result, the whole planet has been covered as it has become Arctic. And so all of humanity is living on this one train, and the train is just circling the Earth. And the train is very much like society. You have the poor, the oppressed in the back who are living in poverty. And then you have the first-class passengers in the front. And the creator of what's being called the Sacred Engine, his name is Wilford, who's being played by Ed Harris. And so it's very interesting. It's kind of darkly prophetic in a way, because it's really about population control, and it's very dark. It's based on a French graphic novel called my French is terrible. I'm not even going to attempt to say that.
Yeah.
But and hasn't been translated in English. But so it's basically about humanity surviving post global warming, and also the actor from The Host, Song Kang-ho, is in it. And what's cool about it is it's such an international cast. I would come up to Song Kang-ho and I'd go, "Annyeonghaseyo," and which is pretty much all I can say in Korean. And then immediately a Korean interpreter would come up, and then we could start talking, and he would be interpreting for us. But because he doesn't speak a lick of English.
Yeah.
But it's great because you see these Kang Ye-jung and him are they're going to be doing these huge international films and become more well known to a Western audience, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, actually, when I was in Korea, I learned Bobby Lee is now in a new CJ Entertainment film.
A new what?
A new CJ Entertainment film is shooting in Thailand. So our executive producer is is the head of co-production for CJ Entertainment. So he brought Bobby.
Oh,
over.
wow, that's awesome.
So for a new
new
movie.
By the way, Sung Kang-ho, I wouldn't even recognize him. He's lost like 30 pounds.
Wow.
I didn't even know who he was when I saw him.
Wow.
He's
like my favorite Korean
because
actor.
he's one of the people who actually live in poverty, and they're surviving. They're all like emaciated. So.
And on that note, yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'm one of the officers. Yeah, I'm one of the bad people. Exactly.
So much for coming tonight and then just enjoying the events.
Thank you, Uni. Thank you, Korea Society.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.